Everybody, hope you're doing well. Um, so, I'm going to reflect a little bit today on both the Old Testament lesson and the Gospel because they're very similar in a lot of ways. The Old Testament lesson is from 2 Kings 5, and it's about the healing of Naaman the Syrian of leprosy. So, Naaman is the commander of the army of Syria, and he is very close and very trusted by the king of Syria. And so he has leprosy, and on one of the raids that his army has undertaken into Israel, he and his army have captured um, slaves, essentially. And so one happens to be a young girl who is in the service of Naaman's wife. And she feels for her master and says to the wife, it's a shame he's not with the prophet who is in Samaria, which is another way of referring to the northern kingdom or Israel. And so there's a prophet there who can heal him. So he goes to the king and says, Hey, I understand this. And the king says, All right, I'll write a letter to their king and you go. And so he goes, the king gets the letter and says, Who am I? I can't heal the man. I'm not God. So Elisha hears about it and says, Have him come to me. So he comes to him, Elisha, and Elisha sends a servant out and says, Go tell him to dunk himself 7 times in the Jordan River. Well, Naaman's not happy about that. He says, I thought he would come out, he'd wave his hands around, he'd do some stuff and say some stuff, probably abracadabra, alakazam, whatever, and I'd be healed. But I'm not going to do this because we have better rivers in Syria than they have here. And so the people with him said, hey, the reality is you come all this way, and if he'd ask you to do something difficult, you'd do it, would you? Yeah, well, give it a shot. So he does, and he's healed. He comes back, and he's quite humbled by that. And so he comes back and he gives thanks to God, and then tells Elisha, look, I see in this that there's only one God in the world, really. There's only one God, and it's the God over Israel. And he says, So I got a couple of things I need to ask for. One of those is I've got to accompany the king when he goes to worship. And when he does, he kneels. And because I'm the one he's leaning on, I'm going to have to kneel with him. But know this, it's not an act of worship for me to kneel. It's just trying to help the king. And also, can I have like some dirt from Israel that I can take back? Now, that has to do with sacred geography. And there was a belief that the dirt itself was sacred. Now, the Egyptians would have known, well, no, that God actually can be God wherever he wants to be. And so could everybody else would have understood that in the region. That's exactly what Rahab understood when Joshua sent the spies that no, your God is different. He's not bounded by geography. But Naaman says, Can I get some dirt? Because he's going to go home, he's going to make himself an altar, and he's going to worship on that dirt. So he's going to worship the God of that land. He doesn't yet recognize God as the God of all. And so he's healed of his leprosy and gives thanks to God. In the gospel, what we see is Jesus comes upon 10 lepers. They're together. They fall down and they yell at him and they call him master. And they ask for pity or mercy on him, on them. And so Jesus says, All right, go to the priests and show them and let them certify the cure. And as they go away, they're healed. And on the way, so they get healed, and one of the lepers turns around and comes back. It happens that he's a Samaritan. Now, the Samaritans and the Jews didn't get along. There was a community of lepers that had existed, right? So 10 lepers, and hey, our identity is lepers. So now, as they're headed back to show themselves to the priest, they're going to Jerusalem. I guess the Samaritan probably realized, yeah, I'm not going to be welcomed in Jerusalem. And I'm really kind of not welcome here anymore because now we're back to the old identities of Jew and Samaritan. So he goes back to Jesus, and Jesus says, You're the only one that got healed? Where are the other 9? Why didn't they come back? And so what we see is gratitude. That's the main thing. Now, these guys showed obedience in the same way that Naaman ultimately did. He's talked into obedience, but he is ultimately obedient. And these 10, Jesus says go, and they go, and they receive the healing on the way. So they have faith, and they recognize him for who he is. And the word they use there is only used in Luke, by the way. It's really an odd word. It's called epistates. And it's the only, it means master, Lord, all that kind of stuff. It could have used kurios, but they didn't. And Luke is the only person in the entire New Testament who ever uses the word epistates. It's a commander name, essentially, is what it is. It was used within Greek and Roman society to refer to a person of a certain kind of position, and they're recognizing Jesus in that same way. In the same way, for instance, that the centurion recognizes that Jesus has authority in the same way that he has authority, but he has authority over things other than the army. And so what we see in this is these healings. And so there's a gratitude then that that is shown for those healings. And the Samaritan gets it and Naaman gets it. And you might ask the question, John, yesterday you told us this is only for Jews. Well, Samaritan is essentially a Jew. He is one of the lost sheep of Israel. His ancestry dates back all the way to Judaism. And so Naaman, why would Naaman be? Well, it's a curious thing. So I wonder about this, and this is just John wondering. He's an important man. He would be one of the ones who would be strategically important for the king of Syria because he would have been one of the ones with whom that he would discuss military plans. Well, what happens right after that? What happens right after this in the gospel, after Naaman's healing? An odd thing. A very odd thing happens not in the gospel, but in Second Kings. And what is that odd thing? Well, it happens that over the next chapter, what you see is that what would happen is the king would make a plan. We're going to go here and we're going to attack. And then Elisha would go to the king of Israel and say, don't go there because they're going there. And it happened not once or twice, is what the scriptures say. Where to get the intel? Was it a prophetic word or was his buddy Naaman looking out for him? It's impossible to know, but it's certainly curious. And then what happens is it's that the king of Syria gets angry at all this, and he decides he's going to go after Elisha. And so he sends his armies down to Dothan. And at Dothan, Elisha's servant, Gehazi, sees these armies there and panics. And Elisha acts like it's no big deal. Don't worry about it. Here, just Lord, open his eyes. And so he prays that prayer, and the eyes of the servant are open, and he sees the Lord's armies, the angelic armies all around him. They take him captive by striking him blind. They take him home. They take him back to Israel. And they're ready to put him to death there. And Elisha says, no, that's not right. You didn't capture them. Basically, I did. If you had captured them and they were captives, you wouldn't put them to death after you captured them. That's not what you would do. And so he says, just give them something to eat and send them home. And that's what he did. So there's some bond, it seems, that's been forged here between Elisha and the Syrians through Naaman. In the same way, I think I could argue that one of the greatest things Jesus does for the people of Jericho is when he's going on the way to Jerusalem for the final Waterloo, as it were. Then he passes through and he tells a man, Zacchaeus, I must eat at your house today. And it scandalizes everybody there because Zacchaeus is a tax collector. And why would he choose one of the most unrighteous people in the city to do that? Well, at the end of that lunch, Zacchaeus repents and says, I will never be dishonest again. I'll give back anything I've defrauded anybody of, and I will make restitution in all these ways. Well, the present Jesus gave to the people of Jericho was they now have an honest tax collector. Everybody's life got better because of that. And I would argue in the same way, that same basic thing happens with the healing of Naaman. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.